Okay, let's do chapter number 6, which is interest rate options. So in the swaps chapter, we have seen extensively how you could hedge. For example, if you had a floating liability, let's assume here we have a floating liability. And as we have seen on the swaps chapter, we can easily get into a swap deal in which we will pay fixed and receive floating if that's the case that we believe that the rates could go up in the future. So this is the basic setup that we would do in the swap example. Now, if we want to consider interest rate options instead of swap, let's take a look at what could happen. Let's again assume that the company has a LIBOR plus 100 liability. So that's going to be this dashed line right here. And now, instead of going into a swap, we want to go into considering interest rate options. So let's assume that for some reason, 570 is the rate that we will be wanting to hedge from. In other words, we worry about the rate going above 570. By rate, we mean LIBOR. So let's assume that we purchase a LIBOR call. That means that we have an option with the strike price of 570. So that means that if LIBOR is above 570, we will only pay 570. So we'll never pay more than that. So we will analyze this exposure graph in which we have interest cost on the y-axis, and we will have LIBOR at its recent on the x-axis. So this is going to be our exposure graph. So the dashed line, again, this line right here, is what happens when we do not take any hedging, any interest rate options in this case. And now let's see what happens when we do acquire that option. Of course, that option has a price, has a premium. In this case, let's assume that it has a cost of 35 basis points. And you have the option to exercise this strike price of 570 at next reset. So in this case, since the cost of this option is 35 BPS, we will have the original 100 plus the 35 BPS, which is the cost of the option. So as long as we are in this range with LIBOR from 0 to 570, our interest cost will be LIBOR plus 135. Now, if LIBOR happens to go above 570, since you have a call option on that, you will exercise that call at 570. So your maximum cost would be 705. Where does this 705 come from? Well, from LIBOR 570 plus 100, which was what you had to begin with. And then you have the 35 BPS, which is the cost of your option. So in other words, you will never go above 705 as your interest cost. So that's going to be the exposure graph for the situation in which you acquire a LIBOR stroke at 570, and that will be a call option. And that has a price or a cost or a premium of 35 BPS. Now, that's going to be the case for one strike exercise at one reset date. Now, let's assume that you have, as we saw on the previous slide, we have 3 years with quarterly payments. So you will actually have 12 payments to cover. What we just covered here is one payment. So, of course, we want to consider covering more than one payment. We want to cover maybe the 12th payment. So let's analyze a similar situation, but now let's assume that it's going to be over 3 years, not one payment anymore, but it's going to be over 3 years. In this case, let's assume that we want to cover our position if LIBOR goes above 750 during 3 years. So we'll have an option to exercise at each reset date. And the total price of that coverage is going to be 105 BPS, which is going to be linearly amortized over 3 years, which happens to be 35 BPS per year. So you will have an option during 3 years to be exercised at 750 if you want. That's why it's an option. And in this case, the exposure graph will look like this. So you have your original dashed line with LIBOR plus 100. This is your original liability. And now you will have a cost of 750, which is your strike price right here. Your 100 BPS, which comes from the original position, and the 35 BPS, which is the cost of the option per year. So this 885 is going to be the interest cost that you will have per year as maximum. So again, if LIBOR is between 0 and 750, your interest cost is going to be LIBOR plus 135 all the way to this point here. If LIBOR goes above 750, your maximum that you will ever pay is going to be 885. Why? Because you have the option of exercising at 750. If LIBOR goes above 750, you will exercise your call option and you will only pay 750. But you have your 100 BPAs from here and you have the cost of 35 BPS. So your maximum cost will never go above 885. So this is called a cap. Now, at 35 BPAs, and assuming that you have a notional of 100 million, that's quite a lot of money. That's going to be costing you about $350,000 per year on the option premium. So what could we do to reduce that cost? Now, if you think that prices may go up, of course, the opposite expectations of interest rates going down may be quite contradictory. So what you could do is to lower your coverage cost, you could sell a floor. So that means that you still want to be protected if LIBOR goes above 570, but in this case, you want to sell an option so you can get some inflow, some income, if LIBOR goes below 550. So in this case, if LIBOR goes below 550, someone else will exercise on you because you sold that option. And if LIBOR goes above 750, you will be exercising the call that you purchased. So let's take a look at this exposure graph. In this case, your interest cost will always be on this line. It will be either here, or here, or here. And the combination of this cap and this floor is called a collar. So in this case, you have a collar in which your interest cost will never go below 673 or above 873. So let's take a look at where these numbers come from. The minimum, 673, comes from 550, which is the strike price that you sold your floor, 550. And the cost of that is 12 BPS. In this case, these 12 BPAs, you're going to be receiving them because you're selling the option. So the minimum is going to be 550 plus 100 BPS, which is your original liability cost, plus 23. 23 BPS is the net of your 35 cost minus 12, which in this case you're receiving. So you have a net cost of 23 BPS. So that's why you have, in this case here, you have LIBOR plus 123 BPS, which is the net of 35 minus 12, which you are receiving. So your net cost goes down to 23 BPS. So your minimum will be 673. Your trade-off of not being able to take advantage of lower LIBOR is because you're selling the floor. That means that someone else will exercise on you if you go below 550. So that means that your minimum cost will never be below 673. On the other hand, your maximum cost will be 873, which comes from 750, which is your strike, 100 BPS, which is your original liability, and 23 BPS, which is your cost of your collar. So in this case, you will be having a maximum of 873. So notice that now with this new coverage, you will have a somewhat lower cost of 230,000, which is 23 BPS times 100 million, which is the notional in this case. So in this case, you have a color, again, this line right here, here, or here, your interest cost will always be on top of this black line here, because you either will be here if LIBOR is below 550, you will be here if LIBOR is between 550 and 750, and you will be here if LIBOR happens to be above 750 at expiration. Now let's take a look at a different example. Let's assume that this company called Acme has a floating liability of LIBOR minus 50, and it purchases a cap on LIBOR struck at 8 with a cost of 22 BPS per annum. So that means that your original liability of LIBOR minus 50 is going to be, again, this dashed line right here. If you purchase this call option, this interest rate option with a strike price of 8, so you're going to have your 8 here. So that means that your cost will never go above 772. Why? Because your strike is at 8, minus 50 BPS is right here, plus 22, which is your cost, the cost of the option. So that gives you 772, which is the maximum that you will have here. Again, your exposure graph, it's interest cost on the y-axis, the LIBOR at next reset on the x-axis, and your exposure graph will be this one right here, which means that if LIBOR is anywhere between 0 and 8%, you're going to be right here. And if LIBOR goes above 8, you're going to be right here. By the same token as the previous example, if you want to lower your costs, in this case, let's assume that you want to sell a floor with LIBOR struck at 5. So now you will have this situation here. Again, let's go through this. If you have a call option with a strike price of 8, that means that if LIBOR goes above 8, you will exercise that call option on your favor. So your maximum cost will be 8 minus 50 plus 7. In this case, 7, of course, comes from the difference between 22 and 15, which will yield you a net cost of 7 BPS on your coverage. So in this case, your maximum will be 757. Your minimum will be 5, which is the strike price that you sold the option at. So if it goes below 5, someone else will exercise on you. So your minimum cost will be 5 minus 50 BPS plus 7, which is the cost of your coverage, will be 457 right here. So in this case, your exposure graph or your color will be right again on top of this line here. In this segment here, if LIBOR is below 5, if LIBOR is between 5 and 8, you will be right here, which is LIBOR minus 43 BPS. And finally, if LIBOR is above 8, you will be right here. So this is a color on this position for this Acme company. Now let's take a look at an asset. That means that now on the y-axis, instead of interest cost, we will have a yield because you're talking about an asset. So in this case, you're worried that the yield will go down. Before, we were worried about the interest cost going up because it's a liability, but in this case, since we're talking about an asset, we're worrying about the yield going down. So in this case, let's assume again a principal of 100 million with an asset or a investment that is yielding LIBOR minus 10. Now, in this case, I want to fix a minimum of 650 if LIBOR goes below that, and that has a cost of 42 BPS. So again, the dashed line is the original unhedged position, LIBOR minus 10. And if I acquire this option, in this case, notice that it's a floor because I'm worried about the price going down, the yield going down. So if I take that option, I will have a cost of 42 BPS, which will guarantee me that the minimum yield I will get on my investment is going to be 598, which comes from 650 minus 10 BPS minus 42 BPS, which is the cost of my coverage. So in this case, I will be guaranteed a minimum yield of 598. So if LIBOR is anywhere between 0 and 650, I'm going to be right here. And if LIBOR goes above 550, of course, I'm going to have this LIBOR minus 52 BPS segment right here. By the same token of the previous example, if I want to lower the cost of my position, I can sell a cap. In this case, I will be selling a cap if LIBOR goes above 750, which is right here. Again, I have an investment, so I have yield on my y-axis. So what will my exposure graph look like in this case? In this case, the minimum I will be receiving is going to be 631, which comes from 650, which is my strike price in the floor. If it goes below 650, I will exercise. Minus 10 BPS, which is my original liability. Minus 9, which is my new net cost of the coverage because I sold a cap. So my cost goes down from 42 minus 33. That's going to be a net of 9. So in this case, my minimum is 631. My maximum, my trade-off for lowering my cost is going to be that if LIBOR goes above 750, someone else is going to be exercising on me. So I'll have to honor that exercise price. So my maximum cost, in this case, actually it's a yield, should be yield here. It's going to be 750 minus 10 BPS minus 9, which is the net cost of the coverage, is going to be 731. So in this case, 731 is going to be my maximum yield in this segment right here. So again, the exposure graph is going to be 631. As long as LIBOR is anywhere between 0 and 650, I'm going to be on top of this segment here. If LIBOR happens to be between 650 and 750, I'm going to be on this line right here, LIBOR minus 19. And finally, if LIBOR is above 750, my maximum yield is going to be 731 right here. So that's, again, also a color, but in this case, I'm applying it to an investment instead of a liability. Thank you.